Hello and welcome to the Commander's Quarters. I'm your host, Mitch. Glad to have you here. Here at the Commander's Quarters, we're all about Commander on a budget. Today we have an episode of Commander's 2 Cents. On episodes like these, I give you my own personal take on topics about the format in general and current news. This show and episodes like this one are possible thanks to viewers like you. If you're looking for an easy way to help support this show, make sure that you like, share, and subscribe. Also, hit that bell notification icon so you don't miss any new episodes. And while you're at it, subscribe and review our podcast as well. You can also go check out our playmats and other merchandise at thecommandersquarters.com. Another easy way to support this show is with our TCG player affiliate links. So whether you're buying a deck or individual cards, you can use this general link right here or one in the description. And the final way that you can support this show is by supporting us directly by becoming a patron. There are many benefits to being a patron, and I truly couldn't do this without all of their support. So in a previous episode, I went over my favorite new cards from C20. Now, if you watched that episode, you may have noticed that a certain cycle of cards were missing from any of the selections. And that was completely intentional because I thought it might be best to talk about those cards on their own episode. And those cards are the if you control a commander, you may cast this spell without paying its mana cost cycle. So the 5 cards in that cycle are Obscuring Haze, Flawless Maneuver, Deadly Rollick, Deflecting Swan, and Fierce Guardianship. And the reason that I want an entire episode to talk about these 5 cards is I want to answer the question, how pushed is the new C20 cycle? Power creep is something that affects all formats, including Commander. When a powerful card gets printed that's just strictly better than previous cards, it can push older cards out. Basically, the more sets that are printed, the more cards that are out there, and the more powerful cards that get made. Certain cards in those sets that are extremely powerful are considered pushed. As in the phrase, wow, Wizards really pushed the power level on this card. So basically today I'm going to go through these 5 cards on this new cycle to determine if this new cycle is pushed. Or at the very least, is a card or certain cards pushed? Are there any examples of power creep in these or not? So this episode I'm going to go through each card individually and I'm going to go through them from least powerful to most powerful. And of course these are just my opinions, so please keep that in mind. And with all that said, let's jump into it. So let's start things off with number 5, or in other words, the least powerful out of the 5 in the cycle. And in my opinion, that would be Obscuring Haze. Obscuring Haze is an instant that costs 2 and a green. It says if you control a commander, you may cast a spell without paying its mana cost, prevent all damage that we dealt this turn by creatures your opponents control. So this is a one-sided fog that you can cast for free if your commander's in play, but if not, you're paying 2 and a green. Now, fogs in a format like Commander aren't necessarily the most powerful of things. In fact, outside of Turbo Fog decks, not many run them. Now, my Progenitus Turbo Fog deck is definitely interested in this card. A fog that I can cast for free when I'm completely tapped out and my commander's in play? Sign me up. And for most decks that run fogs, 3 mana for a one-sided fog probably isn't too much to spend. So if your commander's not in play, it's not too much of a hassle to cast it. Let's take a look at some comparable cards really quick. The original fog just costs a green and it says prevent all combat damage to be dealt this turn. So for just 1 mana, you fog everything. So this either costs 1 mana more or 2 mana less than Obscuring Haze depending on if your commander's in play. But again, a key difference is that this is not a one-sided fog like Obscuring Haze. In the right deck, you can definitely use that one-sided effect to your advantage so you can block and kill some creatures. Let's take a look at another fog though with Snag. It's an instant that costs 3 and a green and says you may discard a forest card rather than pay this spell's mana cost. Prevent all combat damage that be dealt by unblocked creatures this turn. So like Obscuring Haze, you can cast this for free. But the cost of casting it is to discard a forest rather than have your commander in play. And unlike Obscuring Haze, it's pretty much not one-sided. You can't block the creatures to kill them because then they're going to deal combat damage to yours too. A one-sided fog that is somewhat similar to Obscuring Haze is Winds of Calcisma. It's an instant for 1 and a green and it says prevent all combat damage to be dealt this turn. But it has Ferocious if you control a creature with power 4 or greater, instead prevent all combat damage to be dealt this turn by creatures your opponents control. So it's a fog for 2 mana that is conditionally one-sided. Now Obscuring Haze in my opinion is definitely not a broken or pushed card. I'm not saying it's the best fog out there, but even if it is, it's a fog. I've said this before and I'll say it again, fogs, outside of very specific decks, do not see too much play in Commander. So Obscuring Haze is definitely not a pushed card and it is the least powerful out of the cycle. But let's take a jump in power and move up to number 4. And in my opinion, the 4th most powerful out of this cycle is Deadly Rollick. It's an instant for 3 and a black and it says if you control a commander, you may cast this spell without paying its mana cost, exile target creature. Now unlike fogs, exiling a creature is something that many decks in Commander want to do. There are a decent amount of Commander staples out there that see a ton of play and do pretty much the exact same thing. However, those have a mana cost and this one you can cast for free. Now 4 mana is definitely above what many players would want to spend for casting this card, but being able to cast it for free could be huge. If you've got your commander in play and you're tapped out and an opponent plays a creature that you need to deal with right away, you still can. Now does the opportunity to cast this one for free make up for its overcost? Maybe. I think time will especially tell on this one to see how much play it actually sees. Some cards to compare this one to are Path to Exile, Swords to Plowshares, and Force of Despair. Path to Exile and Swords to Plowshares are your classic 1 mana exile target creature spells for Commander. Both have a downside, but that downside is pretty small for being able to exile any creature for 1 mana. Obviously, if your Commander's in play, Deadly Rollick is better than both of these. But if your Commander is not, it's obviously much worse. I definitely think that Deadly Rollick will not be replacing either of these cards in pretty much any deck. But perhaps Force of Despair is a better comparison. It's an instant that costs 1 black and it says if it's not your turn, you may exile a black card from your hand rather than pay the spell's mana cost. Destroy all creatures that enter the battlefield this turn. So like Deadly Rollick, you have the opportunity to cast this spell for free. This one can get rid of multiple creatures, but only creatures that enter the battlefield this turn. And also just destroys them, it doesn't exile. Now, Force of Despair doesn't see too much play. Deadly Rollick might see a bit more, but I'm not sure exactly how much more. Again, I think time will tell with this one especially. But now let's make a big jump in power and move on to number 3. In my opinion, the top 3 are much more powerful than the previous 2. So in my opinion, the third most powerful this cycle is Deflecting Swan. It's an instant for 2 and a red, and it says if you control a commander, you may cast a spell without paying its mana cost. You may choose new targets for target spell or ability. Although the previous 2 cards I did not think were all that powerful, this is the first one where I will say that I think that this is pushed. This is free protection from target removal and more as long as you've got your commander. It's also a free counter spell for red. What I mean by that is that if someone tries to counter your spell, you can just cast this and then retarget the counter spell to this, and then it's not countering your original spell. So again, a free counter spell. Yeah, this card is definitely pushed in my opinion. There are plenty of targeted removal spells that see a lot of play in this format. And of course, there are plenty of counter spells as well. This has a ton of applications that can really save you in a pinch out of nowhere. And in my opinion, 3 mana is just fine for this kind of effect. Again, remember that this can retarget abilities too. So you're not overpaying for this spell if you have to hard cast it, and it's absurdly good if you can cast it for free. So let's take a look at some similar cards. First up, there's Misdirection, which costs 3 and a blue, and it says you may exile a blue card from your hand rather than pay Misdirection's mana cost, change the target of target spell with a single target. So you can also cast this one for free, but only if you exile a blue card from your hand. On top of that, you can only choose a single target, so it's not going to work against certain spells. And again, this doesn't let you redirect abilities either. And then Ricochet Trap costs 3 and a red, and it has that same text, and it says if an opponent casts a blue spell this turn, you may pay red rather than pay the spell's mana cost. So essentially you get a 3 mana discount if a blue spell was cast. Obviously this one's extremely circumstantial and has the same downside as Misdirection. One that does see a decent amount of play though in Commander is Imp's Mischief. It's an instant for 1 and a black, and it says change the target of target spell with a single target. You lose life equal to that spell's converted mana cost. So it costs less than the others, but there's no way to cast it for free or at a reduced cost, and you do lose life equal to that spell's converted mana cost. This is in black though, and many people don't expect black to have that kind of effect. It can be basically used as a counter spell in black. Similarly, they don't really expect to have it too much in red either. So again, Deflecting Swan can come out of nowhere and can really change the course of a game. It can completely change the targets of a spell or ability, and it can do this for free. Yeah, in my opinion, that's a bit pushed. But anyways, let's move on to one that is slightly more pushed at number 2. In my opinion, this one's actually pretty close in power level to Deflecting Swan. I kept going back and forth between the two, but I settled on this one at number 2. So anyways, coming in at second place, we've got Flawless Maneuver. Flawless Maneuver is an instant that costs 2 and a white, and it says if you control a commander, you may cast this spell without paying its mana cost. Creatures you control gain indestructible until end of turn. So this is board wipe protection for free. Yeah, this is really good. Okay, let's take a look at both scenarios though. You don't have your commander out. Are you willing to pay 3 mana to save your entire team? The vast majority of the time, the answer to that is yes. And in the other scenario where you do have your commander out, you could be tapped out and then your opponent casts a board wipe expecting to blow everything up, and your stuff stays put. This can turn a game completely on its head. When this is in your hand, it's probably beneficial for you to even completely tap out to bait that board wipe. You're in a strong position and someone sees that you're tapped out, so they decide to cast their board wipe to blow everything up, and your stuff is still there. They blow up their creatures and your other opponent's creatures, but not yours. Yeah, that's a very powerful thing. There are already 3 mana board wipes out there like Make a Stand that see play. It says creatures you control get +1/+0 and gain indestructible until end of turn. Let me make it clear that that +1/+0 isn't why people are running that card. I definitely think that Flawless Maneuver is definitely up there and in discussion with other board wipe protection spells like Heroic Intervention and Teferi's Protection. Heroic Intervention is an instant that costs 1 and a green, and says permanents you control gain Hexproof and indestructible until end of turn. So this protects all your permanents and gives them Hexproof for 2 mana. Now in many circumstances, this is going to be the better card. But in circumstances where you have to tap out, you're going to want that Flawless Maneuver. And Teferi's Protection is probably just straight up better. It's a very powerful card. It says until your next turn, your life total can't change, and you've got protection from everything. All permanents you control phase out, exile Teferi's Protection. Yeah, that's absurdly powerful. It's going to be hard for any board wipe protection to ever eclipse that. But still, Flawless Maneuver being free board wipe protection is an extremely powerful thing. Although it's no Teferi's protection, I still think it's a pushed card. And yet, it is not number 1 out of this cycle. So let's find out what that card is at number 1. And the most powerful card out of this cycle, by far in my opinion, is Fierce Guardianship. It's an instant for a 2 and a blue, and it says if you control a commander, you may cast a spell without paying its mana cost, counter target non-creature spell. That's right, Wizards printed another free counter spell. This card is absurdly pushed, and I think it's going to be hard to debate against that. Free counterspells are just very, very powerful things. And yes, I know that this can only counter non-creature spells, but the vast majority of the time, that's what you want to counter. Let's just say that there's a reason that Essence Scatter sees play in 2% of decks, and Negate sees play in 23%. Speaking of Negate, it's one of our comparable cards. It's an instant that costs 1 and a blue, and it says counter target non-creature spell. So essentially it costs 1 less than Fierce Guardianship, but it can't be cast for free. As I mentioned before, it sees a ton of play because countering non-creature spells is important. Another comparable card is Foursome Negation. It's an instant that costs 1 blue, and it says if it's not your turn, you may exile a blue card from your hand rather than pay the spell's mana cost. Counter target non-creature spell. If that spell is countered this way, exile instead of putting it into its owner's graveyard. So this one you can cast for free, but only if it's not your turn and you have to exile a blue card. Now this one does exile the spell, but I think in Commander, Fierce Guardianship is just better. If your Commander's in play, not having to lose another card and being able to cast on your turn can be huge. And a final comparable card is Pact of Negation. It's an instant for 0, and it says counter target spell. At the beginning of your next upkeep, pay 3 blue. If you don't, you lose the game. So basically, this is a counter spell that you can cast for free, but in the future, you have to pay 5 or you lose. Now again, this can counter anything, but it does come at an eventual cost. With your commander in play, you can cast Fierce Guardianship with no actual cost at all, but it only can counter non-creature spells. But again, the majority of the time, non-creature spells are what you want to counter. So Fierce Guardianship is basically a negate that might cost 1 more, but a lot of the time, it's just going to be cast for free. Yeah, again, that's extremely powerful and very pushed in my opinion. But one quick note before I wrap things up. Yes, to cast these spells for free, you are dependent on having your commander in play. However, in Commander, the vast majority of decks revolve around their commander. When one of these are in your hand, you can't always guarantee that your commander is going to be in play, but there's a good chance that they might be. With Fierce Guardianship specifically, if your commander is part of a combo, it makes it a lot easier to protect that combo. Obviously, Deflecting Swan and Flawless Maneuver can help protect that as well. Now, out of this entire cycle, I'd say that 3 out of the 5 are pushed. But Fierce Guardianship is by far the most pushed in my opinion. I think that nearly all blue decks are going to want it. Now, people have different opinions on power creep and how it's affecting Commander, but I don't think that there's any debate that this is an extremely powerful card. It's going to push out a ton of cards and a lot of decks that is just strictly better than. Now, does that mean that Wizards shouldn't have printed this? Only time will tell. And with that, this show is coming to a close, so it's my turn to hear from you. So in the comments below, let me know what your thoughts on this cycle are. And make sure you're following us on social media for more updates and sneak peeks on future episodes. Again, a huge thank you to my patrons who help make this show possible. I truly couldn't do any of this without your support. If you want to support this channel directly, consider becoming a patron. There are many benefits to being a patron, including being able to vote on future commanders for deck techs. There are even tiers where you get your own personalized deck tech dedicated to you. You can check out all the Patreon tiers and rewards at patreon.com/commandersquarters. If you haven't already, make sure that you like and subscribe to the channel. Here at the Commander's Quarters, we're all about budget Commander. So while you're at it, go ahead and check out some of our other types of episodes. And with that, I'm out of here. Thanks again and have a good one.